W Otaku words.
Hello, Otakus. This is Otaku Words, and today we are back with a brand new story. So let's get started with episode 1. The day gave no warning of disaster, right up until the moment Maddie received the message that his younger sister had been critically injured and rushed to the hospital. Sitting beside the bed, he gently brushed the cheek of the unconscious girl. With quiet bitterness in his voice, he murmured that he used to enjoy how she always argued back with him, how he deliberately teased her just to see her react. Now, Elira lay completely still, untouched by his words or his presence, trapped in a deep, unresponsive sleep. Maddie studied her face in silence, as if weighing a decision that had long been postponed. At last, he spoke again, admitting that he had hidden something from her all this time. Elira was not the only one in their family whose quirk had awakened. This had surfaced as well. Maddie revealed that his quirk allowed him to extract and claim the quirks of others. As he spoke, a faint blue core materialized above Elira's head, drawing out thin, shimmering strands of her latent energy. The core pulsed steadily as it absorbed them, before drifting down into Maddie's open palm. The moment the core dissolved into him, an internal confirmation echoed in his mind. The quirk transfer was complete. He had obtained a low-tier mental quirk, one capable of releasing a focused psychic shock. What surprised him wasn't the effect, but the classification. Elira's quirk was far too weak to explain how she had ended up frozen solid during what witnesses had described as an accident. The explanation no longer sat right with him. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that what happened to her had not been unintentional. His thoughts were interrupted by raised voices in the corridor. His father was arguing with someone outside. A legal representative named Corvin Hale was trying to calm the situation, explaining to the other family that the incident was nothing more than an unfortunate coincidence. Certified heroes were not gods, he argued. They fought creatures daily, saving countless lives, and collateral damage was sometimes unavoidable. Compensation, he insisted, was the appropriate resolution. Maddie's father, Ronan, flung the offered documents aside, shouting that they did not want bloodstained money. Corvin faltered, clearly unsure how to proceed when faced with outright refusal. Having heard everything, Maddie stepped out of the room, calmly picking up the scattered papers from the floor. Ronan stared at him in disbelief, asking what he thought he was doing. No amount of money could replace Elira's life. Rising slowly, Maddie placed a steady hand on his father's shoulder and spoke with controlled calm. They needed that money to keep Elira alive, to support her condition, and to secure proper care for however long it took. Ronan froze, reality finally cutting through his anger. As much as he hated it, his son was right. Turning his attention back to Corvin, Maddie said he was willing to sign, but only after adding a few conditions. Corvin raised an eyebrow and agreed to listen. Maddie's demand was simple. The hero responsible must personally apologize to Elira face to face. The representative hesitated and offered to apologize on the hero's behalf instead. Maddie refused. He wanted the one responsible to appear in person. Corbin took a step forward and explained that the hero's schedule was completely overloaded. Arden Voss wanted to apologize, but active combat operations made it impossible. Instead, they were willing to increase the compensation significantly. With no real leverage left, Maddie accepted. He signed the documents and handed them over. Corbin smiled with visible relief and left the hospital at once, having already spent far too long negotiating with grieving parents. Outside, he immediately contacted his employer, cheerfully reporting that the matter had been resolved, though at a higher cost. The news was met with approval. Back in the room, Maddie sat beside his sister once more. He asked her not to hate him for the decision, explaining that their family situation left no alternatives. He promised her quietly that he would uncover the truth. Coincidences no longer fooled him. That night, a resolve took shape. If the world allowed unworthy people to call themselves heroes, then the system itself needed to be challenged. To begin, Maddie moved out of his parents' home and closer to the city center. He found an affordable apartment in a decent neighborhood faster than expected. When he arrived, 2 of the residents were already waiting. The blonde girl introduced herself as Lyra, then gestured to her friend Nessa, explaining that a third roommate hadn't returned yet. Maddie wasn't surprised. He had already agreed to share the place with them. Lyra suggested celebrating the new arrival, but Nessa declined, explaining she planned to spend the evening at the library to keep up with her university coursework. Maddie thanked them and declined as well, saying he was still tired from the move. He retreated to his room, set his suitcase down, and collapsed onto the bed. After a short while, he checked his phone. A trending video caught his attention. Heroes battling monsters, already flooded with views. Other clips explained rare quirk manifestations. Nearly 20 years earlier, dark rifts had begun opening across the world, unleashing creatures that nearly overwhelmed humanity. Survival had only been possible thanks to those whose quirks awakened. Over time, these individuals became known as heroes. Laws were eventually passed to regulate quirk usage, allowing only licensed individuals to wield them openly. As the footage played, Maddie recognized the scene. This was the very battle where Alira had been injured. He watched it again and again, searching for anything out of place. Finding nothing obvious, he set the phone aside, deciding to review it more carefully the next day. After replaying the footage several more times, Maddie let out a heavy sigh and set the phone aside. For now, nothing in the recording stood out as suspicious. He decided it would be better to analyze it again tomorrow, with a clearer head. When he checked the time, his eyes widened. It was already 2 in the morning. He sprang up from the bed. If he didn't sleep soon, tomorrow's work would be a disaster. Gathering his toiletries, he stepped out of the room that he moved down the hallway without turning on the lights, careful not to wake his roommates. After just a few steps, he froze. Ahead of him, a girl was barely keeping herself upright, shuffling forward while leaning against the wall. It didn't take long for him to realize she must be the third roommate who hadn't returned earlier. Sensing someone nearby, the girl slowly opened her eyes, trying to focus on the figure in front of her. Maddie greeted her quietly without moving closer. Pushing herself away from the wall, the girl muttered an apology and said she needed to use the bathroom first. The moment she sat down, she emptied her stomach, clearly having drunk far too much. Only a few minutes later, she was already asleep, slumped against the side of the toilet. Noticing this, Maddie cautiously entered the bathroom and gently shook her shoulder, asking if she was all right. When she didn't respond, he stared at her in silence, considering what to do. He didn't want any misunderstandings. Leaving the bathroom, he knocked on Lyra's door, convinced that involving another woman was the safest option. After a moment, the door opened, and a half-asleep Lyra stepped out, yawning as she asked why he was awake so late. Maddie apologized and gestured toward the bathroom, explaining that their other roommate was drunk and needed help. He felt it would be better if another girl handled the situation. Lyra sighed, clearly used to this scenario, and said it wasn't the first time. Telling him to just leave her there, she added that it was late and she had work in the morning. With that, she closed the door, leaving Maddie alone again. Realizing there was no one else to rely on, Maddie returned to the bathroom. He tried once more to wake the girl so he could help her back to her room, but she didn't stir. Letting out a quiet sigh, he apologized under his breath and carefully lifted her into his arms. At that moment, a notification surfaced in his mind. A dormant quirk had been identified. This quirk temporarily forced the brain into an overloaded state, sharply increasing cognitive processing. The note added that the owner was completely unaware of possessing it. Maddie carried the girl into the living room and gently laid her on the sofa, covering her with his jacket. Without hesitation, he extracted the quirk, promising himself he would repay the debt someday. As the process finished, a faint smile crossed his face, curiosity rising about how this new quirk would affect him. Another message followed. The newly acquired quirk shared the same mental classification as the one he had taken earlier, making them compatible. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Maddie formed a familiar blue energy core in his palm and willed them to merge. Both cores lifted into the air, slowly fusing into a single one. Moments later, an orange core settled into his hand. The confirmation arrived. He had obtained an enhanced cognitive quirk, one that automated mental assaults while dramatically improving calculation and deduction. Reading the description, Maddie immediately thought of the video. With this quirk, he might finally be able to uncover what really happened during the incident that injured his sister. Exhaustion soon overtook him, and a few hours later, the morning sun rose over the city as he slept, lost in dreams. Persistent knocking dragged him back to reality. Groggy, Maddie opened the door and asked who it was. When he focused his eyes, surprise flashed across his face. The girl from the night before stood there, now fully awake and dressed simply, holding his jacket with a small smile. She introduced herself as Aries and thanked him for helping her. Taking the jacket back, Maddie said it was nothing and told her she could call him Maddie. Remembering what he had done the night before, he asked cautiously whether she felt any discomfort. Aries waved it off, saying she felt fine and was used to such mornings. Hearing that, he relaxed and smiled. That moment, Rowan, one of Maddie's co-workers and closest friends, appeared, greeting him enthusiastically and congratulating him on the move. When Rowan noticed Aries standing there, he froze, shock written all over his face. Pointing at her, he demanded to know how Maddie dared to get involved with someone behind his friend's back. Maddie quickly clarified that she was simply a roommate. Rowan stared at him, stunned, before straightening his clothes and clearing his throat. Stepping forward, he introduced himself to Aries with exaggerated confidence, explaining that he worked with Maddie and possessed a rare visual recording quirk that allowed him to capture images and videos directly. He added enthusiastically that she could contact him anytime if she needed anything. Maddie knew all too well how endlessly talkative his friend could be. Without letting the situation drag on, he stepped closer and gently turned him toward the door. Then he looked back at the girl and explained that Rowan had come to give him a ride to the editorial office, and they needed to leave. Since it was still early morning, traffic was light, and it didn't take long for them to reach the office building. Sitting down in his chair, Maddie immediately pulled up the recording he had examined so carefully the night before, hoping that this time he would finally uncover something important. Unfortunately, the result was the same. He still couldn't find anything new. The hero in the footage used an ice-based quirk to defeat the monster threatening the city in just a few minutes. Maddie then activated his enhanced cognitive quirk to test how much it could help. Replaying the scene once more, his perception sharpened. Details he had overlooked before now stood out clearly. Even the smallest ones. One particular movement caught his attention. Maddie paused the recording. During the middle of the battle, the hero had made a strange gesture, briefly touching his lips. Before Maddie could think further, Rowan nudged him with his elbow, breaking his concentration. Rolling his chair closer, Rowan asked with a teasing grin why Maddie wasn't interested in flirting with girls, especially someone as attractive as Aries. He joked that if Maddie wasn't going to make a move, then he would. Without taking his eyes off the screen, Maddie replied calmly that she was just a roommate, nothing more. Rowan laughed and said that it was always easy for roommates to become something else, even offering to give advice. Before the conversation could continue, terrified screams suddenly echoed from the street outside. Rowan jumped up instantly and rushed to the window to see what was happening. That a monster had appeared out of nowhere, tearing through the street below. Moments later, emergency speakers activated, announcing that a creature with B-class threat potential had emerged. Civilians were ordered to evacuate and take shelter immediately, while certified heroes were already on their way. Panic spread as people fled in all directions, desperate to reach safety. Through the thick clouds of dust, a tall figure slowly approached the monster. Wearing a confident smile, the hero stepped forward and declared that there was nothing to fear anymore. The city was safe now that Iron Broth, the famous combat hero, had arrived. Relief spread across the faces of the onlookers. The monster noticed its new opponent and lashed out, whipping its massive tentacles toward him. Used to his friend's strange habits, Rowan shrugged and refocused on the scene below, raising his hands to frame the action. At that moment, another hero appeared. Perel, known as Crimson Wing, descended from above and asked Iron Broth if he needed assistance. Without taking his eyes off the monster, he replied that her timing was perfect and told her to attack, while he kept the creature busy. Though her voice carried a hint of hesitation, Perel agreed. News networks wasted no time and launched a live broadcast. On a studio screen, a dark-haired analyst named Carter commented that Iron Broth's arrival was selfish and overly theatrical. Sitting beside him, Evan asked why he judged the hero so harshly. Carter explained that Iron Broth's quirk required a specific preparation ritual involving food, which often delayed his arrival. By the time he appeared, other heroes had usually already weakened the monster. Evan laughed, and said that such insider commentary was exactly what viewers expected from Carter. Clearing his throat, Carter signaled them to focus, as the real fight was about to unfold. Iron Broth charged forward and slammed the monster into the ground. As it lay still, Crimson Wing shouted for him to move back. She stretched her hand forward, releasing countless blazing, butterfly-shaped flames that swarmed the creature in an instant. Within moments, the monster's massive body was engulfed in scarlet fire. Iron Broth barely leapt away in time to avoid being caught in the inferno himself. Watching the broadcast, Evan remarked that the monster's end was near. Carter disagreed, saying it was far too early to celebrate. When asked why, he replied calmly that monsters were intelligent, and throughout the entire fight, the creature hadn't shown a single sign of panic. A towering vortex of flames erupted skyward. As the firestorm faded, the monster stood up completely unharmed. Iron Broth's expression darkened as he announced that the enemy had evolved, forming a heat-resistant shell. Horror spread across Crimson Wing's face as she asked if he could hold out until reinforcements arrived. The hero hesitated for just a moment. Hesitation flickered through Iron Broth's mind. A warning from his management resurfaced. If he wanted to remain one of the company's flagship heroes, failure was no longer an option. One more loss would push him aside, redirecting attention and resources toward younger, rising figures. If he faltered now, his position as the company's veteran centerpiece would vanish. From a concealed vantage point nearby, Maddie observed everything in silence. Iron Broth raised his hand to his mouth and discreetly swallowed a small blue pill. Despite the distance, Maddie noticed it instantly and froze. He recognized it. He had seen something identical before. At that moment, one of the monster's tentacles wrapped around Crimson Wing, crushing her tightly. Her scream echoed through the street as she cried out for help. The pressure intensified as several more limbs surged toward her at terrifying speed. Overcome with fear, Crimson Wing shut her eyes and screamed that she didn't want to die. Then, suddenly, one of the tentacles was severed cleanly. The creature froze, staring in disbelief at the limb that had been cut away along with its prey. Iron Broth had arrived in time, tearing her free at the last possible second. In the studio, Evan slammed his fist onto the table in excitement. He reminded viewers that Iron Broth's combat state normally lasted no more than 15 minutes. Yet this time, not only had he exceeded that limit, he had grown stronger. Jumping to his feet, Evan shouted that their hero hadn't faded with age. Carter, more restrained, nodded in agreement, clearly impressed, though he didn't get the chance to finish his thought. Evan suddenly sat back down, his expression tightening as he stared at the monitor. The monster was attacking again. Its tentacles sharpened and lifted high before lunging forward. A thunderous impact followed, kicking up massive clouds of dust and debris. Wrapped in crackling blue lightning, Iron Broth endured the assault and scoffed that it was weak that a furious roar erupted from beneath the rubble. In an instant, the monster's limbs were severed, its core pierced through with overwhelming force. Iron Broth poured everything into the strike, smiling as he countered flawlessly. The creature's body, paralyzed by lightning, hovered for a few seconds before collapsing. Its dismembered tentacles hit the ground one after another. Moments later, Iron Broth himself dropped behind the defeated foe. The moment his feet touched the ground, blood burst from his mouth as he choked violently. His strength drained rapidly, forcing him to brace himself with his hands to avoid collapsing completely. Crimson Wing rushed to his side in panic. When he looked up at her, she froze. His complexion had turned ashen, veins bulging unnaturally beneath his skin. The sight made her shudder. She had never seen anything like it. Fighting through her fear, she knelt beside him and asked what was happening. Iron Broth turned away, squeezing his eyes shut as he struggled to regain control. After several tense moments, his condition stabilized. Slowly standing upright, he scratched his head beneath the mask and laughed, telling her he was fine. He had simply pushed his cork too far. Relief washed over Crimson Wing. Together, they stood and accepted the cheers of the citizens whose lives they had saved. Throughout it all, Maddie continued watching from the shadows. Once the chaos settled, he finally decided to move. He needed answers, especially about that blue pill. As he stepped forward, a faint movement caught his eye. He stopped and looked back at the monster's corpse. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He frowned, thinking he might have imagined it. Then something small crawled out from beneath the body, a smaller version of the one-eyed creature, frantically scanning its surroundings. The creature noticed Maddie and lunged toward him. Calmly, Maddie assessed it. Physical and elemental defenses that strong usually hid a weakness elsewhere, most likely the mind. As it rushed him, the creature snarled that it would take revenge once it found a new master and absorbed enough energy. For that purpose, it decided Maddie would serve nicely. Maddie remained completely relaxed. A faint grin crossed his face as he remarked that this would make for a perfect experiment. Extending both hands, he activated his mental impact quirk and released it directly at the creature. Shock flashed across the monster's face. Before it could reach him, its small body collapsed lifelessly onto the pavement. Crimson Wing, who had been turning back, sensed the surge of energy and paused. Meanwhile, Maddie approached the corpse, lifting it by its tentacles to confirm the kill. Even if mental strain was its weakness, such a low-output attack shouldn't have worked so easily. Yet the creature was undeniably dead, now completely certain. Maddie initiated quirk extraction on the creature. Moments later, a blue core dropped into his palm, faint arcs of lightning rippling across its surface. A surge of energy spread through his body, wrapping him in a blue aura as a confirmation appeared. He had acquired a defensive quirk that nullified high heat below a certain threshold and drastically reinforced physical resilience. After deactivating it, Maddie formed another core in his other hand and studied the blue and orange ones side by side, remarking that the saying about every quirk having a weakness simply did not apply to him. A puzzled voice sounded from above. Crimson Wing, still airborne as she searched the surrounding rooftops, was trying to locate the source of the energy surge she had sensed. Maddie immediately slipped behind the nearest building, melting into the shadows. It was far too early for other heroes to learn about him. The next moment, the girl landed not far from his hiding place and scanned the area, convinced the disturbance had originated here. While she searched, Maddie quickly donned a mask that concealed his entire face along with a long, dark cloak. Without stepping out, he called out calmly, asking who she was looking for. Crimson Wing turned toward the voice and asked if he had just used a quirk nearby. After a brief pause, Maddie stepped out from cover and admitted it was him. When he was only a few meters away, she eyed him suspiciously and asked whether he was a registered hero, since she had never seen him before. He replied that he wasn't a hero at all, just a passerby who had cleaned up the mess, before tossing the corpse of the creature at her feet. Shock crossed her face as she stared at the miniature version of the one-eyed killer. She looked back at the stranger uncertainly, thinking that even if he had destroyed such a dangerous monster alone, an unregistered individual had no right to use a quirk openly. Maddie remained calm and unmoving. When the silence stretched on, he decided there was no reason to stay and stepped forward, intending to pass her. As he drew near, Crimson Wing shifted sideways and raised her hand, blocking his path. Forcing herself to speak, she declared that he had used his quirk illegally and would have to accompany her to the Guardian Union for inspection. Maddie looked down at her and asked flatly whether she truly believed she could stop him. Fiery wings flared behind her as she lifted into the air, announcing that his actions violated quirk law and that she was authorized to intervene. Butterflies of flame poured from her palm, circling Maddie in rising heat. He reached out, touched one of the blazing wings, and calmly asked if this was how defenders treated ordinary people. Her eyes widened in disbelief as he crushed the flame construct with a single motion and stepped closer. Raising his clenched hand to her eye level, he said it was his turn now. Realizing she was no match for him, Crimson Wing shot skyward at full speed, shouting an apology as she fled. Maddie dismissed her from his thoughts almost immediately, his mind returning to the strange pill the noodle-themed hero had taken earlier. He was certain the one responsible for his sister's fate had used the same substance. Removing his mask, he swore to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Hours later, the city was lit not by the sun, but by countless stars. Maddie's workday had ended, and he boarded a metro that ran infrequently at such late hours. Sitting on a bench, he reasoned that if he wanted to avoid drawing attention, he would need to stop extracting quirks indiscriminately. Instead, he would focus on developing his cognitive quirk and tracking down information about those blue pills. All the while, A man with dyed purple hair nearby watched him closely. When Maddie leaned back and closed his eyes, the man waited a moment before walking past, murmuring a quiet apology. Maddie didn't notice immediately. Reaching for his backpack without opening his eyes, his hand met only the hard surface of the bench. Confused, he opened his eyes and stared at the empty space beside him. Realizing the bag was gone, he scanned the carriage and noticed the man in the green jacket who had been standing opposite earlier was nowhere to be seen. It became obvious who had taken it. Maddie searched the car, but the thief was nowhere in sight. Frowning, he briefly considered that the man might possess a concealment-type quirk, since they hadn't yet reached a station. Closing his eyes again, he activated his cognitive quirk, sharpening his senses and focusing on scent. Within moments, he identified the trail. His backpack was nearby. One man carried it, yet his appearance and aura were completely different from before. Maddie discarded the idea of invisibility. This was more likely a transformation quirk. A smile crept onto his face. He had no intention of letting such a useful quirk escape. 20 minutes later, the train reached its final station. Passengers disembarked, and Maddie followed the man at a distance as he strolled casually with the stolen bag. Rift, the thief, was pleased with his luck, stealing from a careless commuter and vanishing without notice. Yet an uneasy feeling gnawed at him, though he couldn't understand why. After walking a bit farther, Rift turned around. His eyes widened when he saw Maddie behind him, waving cheerfully. Shocked that he had been tracked, Rift bolted, sprinting away at full speed. Spotting a public restroom around the corner, he dashed inside. It wasn't hard for Maddie to guess where he had gone. Entering the building, he pushed open the men's room door and asked mockingly whether Rift truly believed he could escape. There was nowhere left for the thief to hide. The restroom was empty, far quieter than Maddie had expected. His gaze slowly shifted to the sign mounted on the opposite door, the women's restroom. That was the only remaining option. Stepping inside, Maddie knocked firmly on the single closed stall and ordered the person inside to come out. A shrill voice immediately screamed back, accusing him of being a pervert. Maddie let out a tired breath and replied that he had no other choice. The next second, he kicked the door down with a single strike. Cosmetics, tissues, and a roll of toilet paper flew straight at him in panic. Brushing paper scraps from his shoulders, Maddie calmly remarked that the quirk this thief possessed was unusually refined. It even altered vocal tone. Pressed against the wall in terror was the culprit, now dressed in women's shorts, a loose top, and stockings. After a brief inspection, Maddie concluded that while the quirk altered clothing and voice, it could not truly reshape the body. Lowering his head in shame, the thief apologized repeatedly, fully aware there was no escape. With trembling hands, he reverted the stolen bag back into its original form and handed it over. Maddie opened the backpack immediately, checking every compartment. Once satisfied nothing was missing, he slung it over his shoulder and coldly asked whether it had been opened. Terrified, the man swore he had never looked inside. That answer was acceptable. Adjusting his glasses, Maddie advised the man to abandon crime and find legitimate work. The thief clasped his hands together, promising never to steal again and thanking him profusely for mercy. Maddie stopped in mid-sentence and asked calmly when he had ever said he planned to show mercy. What followed shattered the thief's awareness. Moments later, Maddie exited, already assimilating the newly acquired quirk. Though he had resolved earlier to stop collecting quirks, ignoring such a convenient trait would have been foolish. The quirk allowed instant wardrobe alteration and spatial storage with a simple gesture. Maddie activated it immediately. In seconds, his appearance shifted completely, replacing plain clothes with a tailored black jacket, shirt, tie, and trousers. His glasses vanished, replaced by subtle lenses. Stepping outside, he assessed his reflection with quiet satisfaction. The quirk was efficient, discreet, and practical. At that moment, two uniformed officers approached, stating they had received a report about someone shouting inside the women's restroom. They asked if he had seen anything unusual. Maddie nodded calmly, pointing back toward the building, saying he had noticed a suspicious individual in disguise behaving erratically. Minutes later, the officers escorted out the unconscious thief, supporting him on both sides. Some people, he thought, were unworthy of the quirks they possessed, and correcting that imbalance was necessary. A week later, He arrived by taxi at the address sent to him by Rowan. After paying the fare, he stepped out. Rowan had been waiting at the entrance, waving energetically and complaining that Maddie had kept him waiting far too long. Maddie, exhausted and uninterested, asked why this meeting was so urgent. Slipping an arm over his shoulder, Rowan grinned and said Maddie wouldn't believe who he had spotted at a nightclub. With little enthusiasm, Maddie asked who could possibly matter that much. Rowan answered immediately. It was Lyria, working there as staff. Maddie shot him a sideways glance and corrected him flatly, saying Lyria was not his girlfriend. He questioned why Rowan was even bringing this up. Laughing it off, Rowan pushed him toward the club entrance, insisting that Maddie stop pretending. Once inside, he would understand everything for himself. The moment they crossed the threshold, Maddie froze. On stage, beneath flashing lights, was Lyria, his neighbor, wearing a provocative bunny outfit, smiling as she danced around a pole enclosed by a metal frame. Cheers echoed through the room as she swayed confidently. Then her expression shifted. Fear flickered across her face as she spotted Maddie standing there, staring back at her in stunned silence. Together with his friend, Maddie walked toward the sofas. They took one of the empty tables, and Rian ordered drinks for himself and his gloomy companion. Taking a slow sip of his cocktail, Rian nudged Maddie, who sat motionless with his chin resting on his clasped hands, staring at the tabletop. With forced cheer, he said Maddie should not look so depressed. There were plenty of beautiful women in the world besides Celine. Since they were already here, on his turf, Maddie should loosen up and enjoy the night. With that, Rian raised his hand and waved towards several girls standing nearby. The girls immediately approached their table, smiling brightly. Rian pointed to them one by one, introducing each, then gestured toward the man beside him, saying this was his closest friend. 3 of the women sat down next to Maddie without hesitation, suggesting they all have some fun together. At the neighboring table, things were much louder. Surrounded by 2 girls, a young man complained bitterly that his luck was terrible tonight. If his brother had not taken his car, he would never have lost. Sitting across from him, Kellen calmly reached for the call button and replied that Drake had simply lost the race and should admit it instead of blaming the car. Drake sneered back, saying Kellen could never gain favor with his father, so he ended up guarding the old man's son instead. He laughed and added that perhaps Kellen's biggest flaw was his inability to keep quiet. His words amused the table, and with a crooked smile, Drake said it was strange how much a mere civilian bothered someone restricted to a low-tier hero rank. Annoyed, Kellen clicked his tongue. Drake abruptly stood up and slapped the waitress who had come to serve them, declaring that her cork was completely worthless. Holding the bottle she had brought, he mocked her, asking how she dared serve something so disgusting. His irritation came less from the drink and more from his guard's earlier remarks. Unable to vent his anger on the hero beside him, he chose the only target available, the girl. He tilted the bottle and poured the alcohol directly over her head. Maddie witnessed the scene from his seat and was about to stand up when Rian quickly grabbed his arm, urgently telling him not to do anything reckless. Drake was no ordinary troublemaker. He was the second son of an A-rank hero from the Titan Forge group, and he had a guardian with him. A registered hero and a civilian were not opponents Maddie could handle openly. Maddie replied calmly that he was not planning to fight. He just needed to use the restroom. With a heavy sigh, Rian released him. The girl remained on the floor, too afraid to lift her head. Drake returned to the sofa, waved dismissively, and ordered the staff to deal with her. They moved immediately. One of the attendants grabbed another bottle and forcibly began pouring it into her mouth, holding her head in place. Just as she resigned herself to what was happening, someone shoved the waiter aside. Freed, she spat out the alcohol and began coughing violently. Without looking at her, Maddie spoke evenly, saying he had heard the mechanical hero's son was present tonight. Kellen stiffened at once and demanded to know who Maddie was. Behind him, Drake lazily poured himself another drink and said the newcomer was probably just another fool rushing toward an early grave. Maddie calmly sat down in the chair across from them and replied that he was simply here to discuss a deal with young Master Drake. Drake's unfocused gaze shifted toward him, and he asked what kind of deal that could possibly be. Concern flashed across Kellen's face as he urged Drake to leave, saying it was late. Drake disliked the suggestion. He jumped up, hurled a bottle at a nearby guard, and snapped that no one should interrupt when a deal was being discussed. His behavior clearly angered Kellen, but he restrained himself. Drake stepped forward and asked Maddie what exactly he wanted. Kellen placed a hand on Drake's shoulder, warning him he was too drunk, then shot an irritated glance at Maddie and muttered that he would handle this clown himself. Maddie had already picked up a glass filled with amber liquid. He said calmly that he disliked violence. Then he added that since Kellen had interrupted his conversation with young Master Drake, he would have to set that principle aside and teach him a lesson. He placed the glass back on the table and rose slowly, never breaking eye contact. Bandages tightened around his fists as his quirk activated. He stated evenly that they would soon see. Who was teaching whom Kellen ignited his own quirk, flames bursting from his wrapped fists as he warned Maddie that he would show no restraint. Maddie remained still, watching carefully. By now, a crowd had gathered, eager to witness a live clash involving a registered hero. With help from a coworker, the girl managed to stand and hurried toward the restroom to wash the alcohol from her hair and face. Losing patience, Kellen launched forward. As he closed the distance, Kellen grew confused. Maddie was not dodging. When the punch came dangerously close, Maddie simply stepped aside and asked in a bored tone if that was all. Kellen laughed and declared that no enemy had ever survived this attack since he became a hero. With a sweeping motion, he unleashed a roaring wave of fire toward Maddie. The surrounding patrons screamed and scattered, convinced the flames would consume everything. The inferno swallowed Maddie completely. Everyone stared in silence, expecting screams. None came. A hand emerged from the blaze. In the next instant, the fire vanished as if erased. Maddie stood unharmed at the center, untouched, his cloak unscorched. He even looked as though he planned to take the hit head-on. But when the clenched fist came dangerously close, Maddie shifted half a step aside and asked in a flat, bored tone whether that was really all his opponent could do. The man scoffed, claiming that Maddie was being foolish because ever since he awakened his quirk, no enemy had survived this technique. With that declaration, he swept his arm forward, unleashing a violent torrent of fire toward him. Nearby patrons screamed and threw themselves aside as the blazing wave surged across the club. The flames were so intense that it seemed they could spread and consume everything in their path. Everyone stared in dread at the silhouette completely swallowed by fire. Yet no cry of pain followed. No sound at all. Then, slowly, a single hand emerged from the inferno. In the next instant, the roaring blaze dispersed as if it had never existed. Maddie stood unharmed in its place, not even a scorch mark on his cloak. The sight left his opponent staring in genuine disbelief. Deciding there was no reason to prolong the encounter, Maddie extended his palm forward and released a focused mental quirk pulse. The man never even realized what struck him. His expression went blank as his thoughts collapsed inward. Before his body could react, Maddie stepped in and struck the side of his neck with the edge of his hand. The man crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he hit the ground. That single moment was enough to sober the drunken young master watching from the sofa. He stared in horror, unable to accept that his elite guardian had fallen so effortlessly. Ignoring the stunned crowd, Maddie knelt beside the unconscious man and placed a hand against his chest. The extraction was swift. A faint shimmer passed through the air, and the quirk bound to the fallen guardian vanished completely. Rising to his feet, Maddie turned and walked toward the trembling heir seated across the room. The young man recoiled, fear finally overtaking arrogance. His remaining escorts quietly backed away, unwilling to stand between him and what approached. Desperate, he forced an awkward smile and asked what kind of deal Maddie had mentioned earlier. If it was money, he could transfer any amount immediately. The offer was ignored. Maddie reached out, seized him by the throat, and lifted him effortlessly off the floor. The young man clawed at his wrist in panic, gasping for breath. When resistance proved useless, he wheezed out a warning, demanding to know whether Maddie understood who his father was. Calmly, Maddie replied that he knew perfectly well, then asked why that should matter now. The young man threatened retaliation, insisting his father would never let this go. Drawing him closer, Maddie lowered his voice and said he had no intention of killing him. He simply wanted to offer him something. Confused and terrified, the heir asked what he meant. Maddie asked whether he wanted a quirk of his own. The question left the young man stunned. His struggles weakened, and Maddie released him. He collapsed to the floor, rubbing his throat, accusing Maddie of playing God. Ordinary people couldn't just be given quirks. With a quiet sigh, Maddie turned away and tossed a slip of paper over his shoulder, telling him that if he truly wanted one, he should come alone to the listed address in 7 days. After that, Maddie reverted to his casual appearance and exited the club. Moments later, his communicator buzzed. A worried voice demanded to know where he had gone. Maddie replied calmly that it was too loud inside and he needed fresh air, asking whether anything had happened. Reassured, his friend said he had missed quite a scene and told him to wait outside so they could eat and talk it over together. Ending the call, Maddie looked up at the night sky. The first stage was complete. Now all that remained was to wait for the bait to be taken. He intended to start with the major corporate hero syndicate. Fast results required bold moves. A few hours later, an emergency council convened inside the Olympus conglomerate headquarters. Surveillance footage of the nightclub fight played across a large screen as the room fell silent, but a stern, silver-haired man never once looked away from the recording. When it ended, he asked the others for their assessments. One analyst stated that the masked figure neutralized the Guardian using precise hand strikes and estimated his quirk output exceeded B-class thresholds. Another disagreed, insisting no physical strike caused the collapse. The decisive moment occurred the instant the masked man moved his hand. A third executive slid a file across the table and told them to review the injury analysis before speculating further. As they read, disbelief spread across their faces. The report stated that the Guardian's quirk signature had vanished entirely. It had not been suppressed or damaged. It was gone. Only then did they understand the magnitude of the threat they were facing. Someone asked where a person capable of erasing quirks could have come from. Another replied that only an S-class entity was known to possess such authority. The silver-haired man asked quietly whether this masked figure could be that individual. One executive immediately rejected the idea, shouting that the transporter was an ancient relic who wouldn't resurface now to sow chaos. With a tired breath, another member argued that this situation exceeded their jurisdiction and should be reported to the Guardian Union. Someone countered that no matter which organization acquired a weapon like that, he would simply be used, and no one would dare report him. After a long pause, the man at the head of the table agreed. For now, this matter would remain internal. He dismissed the room, choosing to think in solitude. That same morning, the shaken heir sat alone in his residence, unable to forget the promise he had been given. The words echoed endlessly in his mind, a quirk of his own. The thought refused to leave his mind. He studied the address written on the slip of paper again, wondering what the masked man would demand in return. The word deal echoed in his head, bringing dozens of uneasy possibilities. With a tired sigh, he crushed the paper in his fist, deciding there was no point in guessing. What mattered was that in just a few days, he would awaken his own quirk. Nothing else concerned him. At the same time, Maddie met his friend Riven at the entrance of the city museum. When asked why they were here, Riven replied that learning more about monsters might help him survive if he ever encountered one. Those words sparked a dangerous idea in Maddie's mind, testing quirk extraction on an S-class creature. As they walked inside, they nearly collided with two girls chatting cheerfully. Maddie frowned, muttering that Riven hadn't come to study monsters at all, but to flirt. Riven only grinned, saying everyone knew this place attracted beautiful visitors, and he couldn't waste the opportunity. Stopping suddenly, Maddie pointed off to the side and said that unlike him, there was only one thing he came here for. Moments later, they stood before a massive exhibit, the Volt Tyrant, an S-class beast over 7 meters tall. Legends said it once paralyzed the entire city, killing 5 A-class and 20 B-class defenders. Without warning, faint arcs of electricity danced across the creature's preserved body. Its head shifted slightly, releasing a bolt of lightning into the air. Riven stared in awe. Even lifeless, the monster radiated terror. Maddie remained calm, eyes fixed on it. Slowly, his hand lifted as he imagined how overwhelming such a quirk would be to possess. A security officer snapped to attention, pointing his baton at Maddie and demanding to know what he was doing. Maddie approached with a polite smile and presented his press card, explaining he was researching monsters for an article. The guard examined it carefully, then allowed him to observe. but strictly forbade touching. Maddie glanced sideways at Riven, who understood instantly. Grinning, Riven wrapped an arm around the guard and casually guided him away, loudly assuring him they wouldn't touch anything. He then asked, with exaggerated enthusiasm, where the most attractive visitors were. The guard froze in confusion. Maddie didn't waste the chance. Extending his palm, Maddie pressed it against the monster and activated cork extraction. His expression tightened. The resistance was intense, far stronger than expected. Minutes passed before the process completed. Finally, a faint purple core formed in his hand. Reading the imprint, Maddie froze. The extracted cork was only E-rank, barely strong enough to power a handheld device. Confusion washed over him. How could an S-class creature yield such a weak cork? It was nothing like he imagined. Studying the corpse again, he realized the truth. The monster had been dead too long. Unlike the one-eyed predator he faced before, there was no remaining vitality. That was why full extraction had failed. Disappointed, Maddie headed for the exit, scanning the remaining exhibits without hope. Still, he refused to leave empty-handed and continued searching. He returned home by evening, the sky painted in soft purples and fading pinks. Sitting at his desk, he laid out the 3 cork cores he had gathered throughout the museum. The first, wrapped in a weak flame, was an F-rank duplication cork that created a short-lived copy. The second, violet in color, manipulated minor electrical currents. The last, an F-rank influence cork, subtly drew attention from others. Maddie sighed heavily. Their strength was laughable. Then a new thought struck him. If corks could be fused, they could also be broken down. Summoning the flame core, he focused and spoke a single command. Nothing happened. Unwilling to give up, he tried again. A sharp crack echoed. The core fractured, dissolving into several black cubes. A system notice confirmed them as Tier 1 dark energy units. Maddie examined one closely, realizing corks were likely constructed from these fragments. Extraction wasn't his only talent. Destruction was possible too. After studying the cubes, another idea formed. Presenting an influence core and a dark unit together, they merged instantly. Moments later, a confirmation appeared. The cork had advanced from F-rank to E-rank. Maddie stared silently, fully aware that he had just uncovered a method to evolve power itself, to influence people and pull off all kinds of schemes. Maddie was genuinely stunned. He had not expected the enhancement to actually work. Setting the pearl aside, he looked with satisfaction at the remaining black cubes of dark energy. He already had ambitious plans for them. Maddie wondered whether it might be possible to create an apex-tier cork on his own using these cubes. At that moment, loud screams echoed from the corridor, and among them he clearly recognized Elena's voice. Maddie frowned, trying to understand what was happening outside his room. A man sitting on the sofa with a smoking pipe glared at the crying girl with irritation and said that all she was capable of doing was shedding useless tears and annoying everyone around her. Removing the pipe from his mouth, he exhaled smoke and stated that they had never intended to deceive her. Meanwhile, unnoticed by anyone, Maddie quietly stepped out of his room to better grasp the situation. Gregor paused briefly, then continued, saying that if they had not acted that way, Elena would never have been so willing to send them money. At that point, a woman standing beside him stepped in, explaining that Elena's brother needed money for a house, a car, and even a suitable bride, which together amounted to more than $1 million. They simply did not have that kind of money. Elena refused to listen any further. Clenching her fists, she demanded to know how they could lie to her, claiming that her father was critically ill and urgently needed money for treatment. She admitted that when she first heard about the illness, she had fallen into complete despair. She explained that she had been forced to work 4 shifts a day, from early morning until late at night, just to gather the money as fast as possible. Calmly exhaling smoke, the man said that at first they had planned for Elena to send whatever she could, and then they would find another way to secure the rest, because their family line could not end with them. These words infuriated her, and she angrily asked whether this was simply another method to force her to return home and be sold to a man she had never even met. Her mother approached and gently took her hand, trying to reassure her by saying that even if the man lacked education, he was honest and kind and would not mistreat her. Elena immediately pulled her hand free and demanded to know where they thought the 50,000 she had sent them the previous week had come from. Unable to hide the truth any longer, she confessed that she had been working as a bartender and service staff in clubs, and had even become an escort to earn that money. Hearing this, her parents were utterly shocked. They could never have imagined such a fate. Gregor was the first to recover. Jumping to his feet, he shouted furiously that her actions had destroyed the family's reputation, dragging it to the lowest possible level. He strode toward her and raised his hand, declaring that he would make her pay for her shamelessness. Elena only closed her eyes and turned away, saying that even his blow would be nothing compared to what she had already endured from her clients. At that moment, Maddie intervened. He appeared beside her in an instant, catching the man's raised hand and stating firmly that she was still their daughter and that such cruelty was unacceptable. Gregor stared at him in shock, yanking his hand free and demanding to know who he was to interfere in their family matters. Maddie shifted his gaze from the man to the woman, noticing that unlike the father, the mother showed visible regret. He decided to give her a small push, one that might help her daughter. The moment Maddie activated his influence-based quirk, the woman stepped forward decisively and slapped her husband across the face. The sound echoed through the room, leaving him stunned. She said coldly that their daughter had been driven to such extremes because of him, and that he had no right to treat her that way after everything she had suffered. After scolding her husband, Lena turned to Elena, hugged her tightly, and apologized for all the pain they had caused. Watching this, Gregor let out a heavy sigh and muttered that their son would earn everything on his own. Seeing the scene unfold, Maddie was reminded of his own sister, still lying unconscious. He pressed his lips together, silently vowing to uncover the full truth and achieve justice no matter the cost. The next morning, he and Elena saw her parents off at the station as they boarded the first train back to their town. Waving goodbye, Elena shouted that she would visit them during the new year. Lena leaned out of the window, smiling as she waved back, telling her daughter to stop doing reckless things and to take care of herself. A few minutes later, the train vanished beyond the horizon. Elena turned to Maddie with a gentle smile and thanked him for staying by her side. Handing her a glass of a refreshing drink, Maddie replied that understanding from her brother would be far more valuable than any amount of money. Elena winked playfully and asked him to lean closer, saying she wanted to tell him something. Embarrassed, Maddie hesitated, then stepped forward. When her lips lightly brushed his cheek, his eyes widened in surprise. Pulling back, Elena thanked him once more. That same night, Maddie set his sights on a new venture. Changing into his suit, he approached the heavily guarded facility responsible for processing monster remains, carefully considering how to breach its defenses. Just then, a truck appeared from around the corner, clearly heading toward the processing center. Maddie decided not to waste the opportunity fate had handed him. He swiftly slipped beneath the vehicle, remaining unnoticed. Clinging to a metal crossbar under the truck, he pressed himself flat, confident this method would get him inside without issue. Allowing himself a brief breath of relief, he suddenly realized he was not alone. A girl pressed against him under the truck looked just as startled by his presence. She immediately gestured for silence, signaling him not to reveal them. Maddie understood at once that she, too, was attempting to infiltrate the facility. When the truck jolted over a bump, they were thrown closer together, earning him a sharp look of irritation from her due to the uncomfortably close contact. Trying to ease the tension, Maddie awkwardly greeted her, remarking that their encounter was an incredible coincidence. His words only angered her further. She snapped that it was not a coincidence at all, but a complete disaster, and that meeting him here was the worst possible outcome. She added sharply that from this point on, they would have to act strictly according to field rules. And that's how this episode ends. This is Otaku Words. Like, subscribe, and drop your feedback in the comments. Let me know which story we should cover next. See you in the next episode.